Hello, and welcome to the Super Simple Homeschool Podcast, where we help you find purpose in your homeschool while keeping it super simple. I'm your host, Jenny Hedrick, and today I am joined by Carolyn Martin from the Christian Home Educators of Colorado. Carolyn is a huge advocate for parental rights and homeschooling, and she works as the Director of Government Relations there at CHEC. And so I invited her to come here today because we have an important issue on the ballot here in Colorado, and I know in many other states as well, around this idea of school choice. So we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about Colorado's Amendment 80, but we're also going to talk about school choice, parental rights, child rights, and the political implications of each one of these things. So whether you're here in Colorado or you're listening in from another state, I hope that you find this to be very valuable and educational before you send in your ballot or hit the polls. Hi, Carolyn. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on and help us get some clarity on a very confusing issue for a lot of homeschoolers.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jenny.
Absolutely.
Great to talk to you.
Why don't you start by just sharing what you do here? You are the Director of Government Relations at CHEC, which is the Christian Home Educators of Colorado. That's a mouthful if you're saying the full thing.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do.
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember Treon Gosen. Do you remember her?
Mm-mm.
She was one of the moms. Everybody should know who she is because she was one of the moms who actually got our law written in 1988. And she watched over it for a long time until she passed away in 2016. And that's when I started working for CHEC. CHEC said, well, we need to get somebody to watch over this now that she's passed. And so that was me. And so what I do up at the Capitol is I advocate for parental rights, home education, and religious liberty, because without parental rights and religious liberty, there's no way we can homeschool and teach our kids the values that we want. So that's my job, is advocating up there at the Capitol, and there is no lack of things to advocate against right now.
Yeah,
So.
I know that. And I so appreciate what you do. I always read your emails so that I know what's going on in the Capitol and what to pray for and what to vote for and how to keep our homeschool freedoms intact. So what you do is so vitally important. So I just want to take a minute to say thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks.
For us homeschool moms who are in the trenches and don't necessarily have time to do the advocacy, it's great to have you out there and know that you're doing that work. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate that too. And I hope that you will still come to the homeschool day at the Capitol. That's another way you can help.
Awesome. That is on my goal. It's my bucket list for 2025. So it's happening. It's happening this next year. So
good.
Let's start by talking just a little bit about school choice. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what it is, why, what are the potential benefits, potential downsides. For people that aren't in Colorado, we'll talk about our amendment that's on the ballot specifically. But what is school choice and who's pushing it and why, and anything like that you want to share with the audience here?
Well, I mean, school choice, I believe school choice is a good thing. I mean, that's why we have the homeschool law. That's how we can go to private schools too. I think all of those choices are good things to be able to choose, as long as the parent choosing it, right? And I guess it's how you define school choice. I define it as the freedom to be able to choose. That's not the definition today that they're using for school choice. When they say school choice, they mean the money follows the child. That is usually what they mean by that. So all across the nation, they're trying to get money from the public schools and give it to private and homeschools. And as CHEC stands against that, because with the money comes control. And so we've always stood against that. In Colorado, though, we've had some of these bills at the Capitol that I've had to fight against that were trying to give money to homeschoolers. And it's usually by our more conservative friends who think that they are helping parents. But when in reality, they can't see the dangers that are happening with this, with the regulatory scheme that comes along with it. So that's kind of what we're up against. In Colorado, we have a lot of freedom right now, and that's a good thing. So we want
Yeah.
to keep it like that. Yeah.
Agreed. I think what's really confusing is that, a lot of Christian homeschoolers do have conservative political leanings. And like you said, most of the school choice is being pushed politically from the conservative side. And so it feels like that is the way we should go, right? If we do that, because the politicians and the people that we follow and trust, like they're the ones kind of putting this out there. And so that I think that's where it gets really confusing for homeschool parents.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of this it started growing, this whole movement of school choice out of the pandemic when everybody was at home, homeschooling their children and seeing what was really going on in the public schools, which we knew was already going on in the public school.
Mm-hmm.
But all these parents started seeing it. So it was this wave of parental rights and school choice, but it's not always giving parents rights. The problem is if they would just secure the parental right to decide how to educate your child, then I would be all for it. But that's really not what they're talking about. It always comes with this idea of funding. And the funding is the problem. And it really doesn't help us in the long run. And why they're doing it, I don't know, because it's not like we as conservatives would say, oh, yes, we want universal health care for everyone. No, we don't. We don't want to have the government pay for health care for everyone. Then why would we want the government paying for education for everyone? That doesn't make sense. They are not making any sense. They're not standing on their principle. But I can tell you this, at the Capitol, when I fight for parental rights, the Democrats don't like parental rights. They think if you give a parent rights, they have an absolute right to do whatever they want with that child. And that's not true. That's not the kind of rights we're advocating for. We're advocating more for let's go back and look at what does God say the jurisdictions are and keep them in their proper jurisdiction. The family takes care of the children. The government does not. And the government has a limited role in our life. Right now, every year, that role has grown as I've worked at the Capitol. That intrusion into our life in every area. Why do I want that in education? So, that's kind of where we're headed and what's happening. Why they can't see it, I'm not sure, but a lot of the national organizations like the Heritage Foundation, some of these other bigger, think tanks up there, conservative think tanks are latching on to this, Americans for Prosperity, all these groups. They're latching on to this idea. And really, when it gets down to the bottom line, it's about money and power. So that's what we need to watch out for. Why are they really wanting to do this? It's not necessarily freedom.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to that end, I think it's hard when you're a homeschooling family in this culture of rising inflation, and in Colorado specifically, but it's everywhere, where it's really hard to support your family on one income or one and a partial incomes. And the idea of like getting some of my tax dollars back, like I pay taxes, I should have a right to, some of that money. It's very appealing. And, we've seen that with different programs out there that have offered funding. And, in the end, it is essentially not really about freedom, is it? And so you can't have both. And I think that's really hard for a lot of families. Anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah, I guess I just want to, bring in this whole part-time public school funding programs, because that's really what you were talking about, some of those areas. And the Department of Ed made it clear that if you're going to be using those programs and they teach any of the subjects that they have set up standards for, they should be teaching to the standards. I know that most of them are not teaching to the standards, but in the coming years, we're going to see them as they get to auditing all these programs, that they will be pushing back against those programs that aren't really doing what they're supposed to do. But we have to realize once we step over that threshold into the public school, they really have more control over the education of our child than we do at that point, even though we're homeschooling. So we've got to be very careful. And more of that is coming, more scrutiny is coming on those programs. So just to get that warning out there.
Yeah. And if there is more money going out to those programs, then definitely the scrutiny and the regulation.
There is a lot more money going out to those programs. Yes, absolutely.
So So let's talk specifically about Amendment 80. I've seen
Okay.
so much confusion in the Facebook groups and in the homeschool community around this amendment. And it is confusing because the messaging is, there's just so many different messages around it. And I think because public schools oppose it, so then homeschoolers think, well, then we should be for it.
Yeah.
And, and so there's a little bit of that goes on. But I did get this, I was going to point this out. People probably have gotten this mailer, this Yes on 80 mailer that makes it seem like this is like such a good thing for homeschoolers. And it is very confusing. So speak to Amendment 80 and what do we need to know?
Yeah. Well, let's first of all just read what it says.
Okay.
And then
That'd be
we'll
great.
dive in from there. Okay, this is a constitutional amendment that's going to go on the Constitution. It says the people of the state of Colorado hereby find and declare that all children have the right to equal opportunity to access a quality education, that parents have the right to direct the education of their children, and that school choice includes neighborhood, charter, private, and homeschools, open enrollment options, and future innovations in education. And then the crux of it is really number 2, which says each K-12 child has the right to school choice. So first of all, I'll say there's one thing I do like about it where it says that parents have the right to direct the education of their children. And if that's all it said, I would be like, hallelujah. Yes, let's put that in the Constitution, because I see every year I'm fighting against their encroachment on parental rights. But then you look a little closer and it talks about how children have 2 distinct rights in this. They have the right to a quality education and they have a right to school choice. That right is given to the child. Now, currently in American jurisprudence, it says that the parents are the ones that are really in control of their child's right. But that is changing, and it is fast changing. I mean, we are seeing our legislature take away parents' rights by giving children rights. They have a right to mental health care at 12 years old. Well, and really in practice, it's way younger than that. They have a right to certain vaccines without parental knowledge or consent. They have a right to an abortion. There are lots of rights that the legislature has given to children already. This is giving the child the right to school choice, which if the parent and the child disagreed, who is going to arbitrate between them? It would be the state, and our state is not necessarily for parental rights. And even our U.S. Supreme Court, you would think Justice Scalia, who was one of the most conservative justices on the court, would be for parental rights. But he has made the statement that no, the U.S. Constitution does not give parents the right to direct the education of their child. So what does that mean and how does that flesh out? I think he was trying to say we really need to put this in the Constitution, which would be a good idea. But this idea of giving the rights to the children is an idea that's growing across the world, really. And so when you look at the landscape of homeschooling across the globe, you will see how they have made homeschooling illegal on the basis of it's a child's right to decide. So this is to us who look at the landscape of homeschooling and looking at family law and the way that they treat parents, looking at some of these other areas, we say this is really dangerous to give the right to a child. If it said that the parent had the right to school choice, okay, fine. But it's this idea of giving the right to the child that is very problematic. And when you're talking about a quality education, who defines that? It doesn't say there in this initiative. We know it's going to be the state. Well, we know they're not giving a quality education in the public school, but does that matter? Who's holding them accountable? Themselves. I mean, they are almost an entity unto themselves at this point. So there's that. And then the other thing is homeschool. It says homeschool, but there is no real definition in the law for homeschool. Our homeschool law, which we call it homeschooling, is actually called the non-public home-based educational program. And they did that on purpose to not call it homeschool. So using that in the Constitution is another problematic thing. It's a minor thing. And then when you look at the opposition to this, the teachers unions and the ACLU and all of those guys, they're complaining about this idea of funding, right? They think this is going to lead to funding. And if you read your blue book, That's kind of what they implied. They were able to get the language in there that said, ultimately, this is going to lead to some kind of voucher program, which, as I've already stated, I'm opposed to, right? So in that regard, I would be opposed to it for the same reason they were if I really thought that this is what was going to happen. I do see there could be a door open for that to happen. And there was a blog post I did in April on this matter. It's called Right to an Education. Because when the government gives out rights, which is not our founding position, right? We are given rights from God, unalienable rights. The parental right to direct your children is an unalienable right. But when you start giving rights to education, it becomes what's called a positive right. And when it becomes a positive right, that means the government has their hand in it. They have their hand in giving it to you, providing it for you, ensuring that you can exercise that right. This is going a little bit too far down that road that we don't want it to go. So that's really my argument in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah.
Of
Well,
why.
thank you. You gave a lot of really good reasons why to vote no on Amendment 80. And correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that I started to really recognize in the last year, and your emails that go out have really helped with this, but anytime that we're giving a child rights, we're potentially taking that away from the parent. Would that be an accurate statement? Like, that's kind of my clue to look for in bills and things like that.
Well, that's true. I mean, you look at exactly when the state's giving the right to the child to have their own mental health care. Yes, it's absolutely taking away the right of the parent. This year, there was even another really scary bill for the foster youth. It gave a bunch of rights to foster youth. And when I read that bill, I thought, these are all the rights they would love to give every child in the state, regardless if they're in foster care or just in your home. And it was pretty scary. It was like a right to privacy, meaning you can't search their bags. You can't take away their cell phone or look at what they're doing on the internet. All kinds of things like that. And you can't take them to church if they don't want to go, and all kinds of these things. That is exactly what they want to give rights. And if you look at Norway, children have a lot of rights, and they give a nod to parents' rights, but really it's the children that rule the roost. And that is not where we want to go. That's not how God designed it. And that's the state intruding on that jurisdiction of the family. And this is just another way to get in there. I'm sorry to say. We after this was brought forward, I got a call from the people that put it forward, but it was too late. They didn't want to change the verbiage on this. And we even tried to get them to pull it, and that was not going to work either. So now we're stuck with this. And really it's a no-win situation, because if it doesn't win, I think it's worse if it wins. But if it doesn't win, what sign does that send to the legislature about school choice and what people really think about it? Because they've made it about school choice when that's not what it's about in my mind.
Sure.
So yeah, it's problematic all around. And I wish we weren't here. But I think anyone across the nation needs to be concerned about this movement towards child's rights. We've seen it. There's a professor of law, I don't remember, Michelle Malkin did a story, an expose one time on homeschooling. And there was a professor of law from William and Mary, and he said that the reason the parent-child relationship exists is because the state confers parenthood on parents. And that's, in academia, that is the thought that they have about parental rights. It's the state that gives you the right to take your child home, to raise them. They give you permission to do this. And this isn't just a one-off. There are law professors all across our nation, and this jurisprudence is moving in that direction, and we need to be careful what we're putting in our Constitution. This is constitutional. This isn't just in law. So I'm really troubled by it. And I hope people understand why. And if you really start looking around, I think you would figure out pretty quickly where this could go bad for us.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that this is constitutional. And I think it's important that we just define the difference between a constitutional amendment and something that's just being put into law, and how those are different? I might not be using the right verbiage, but help us
No, you
understand that
got
a
it.
little bit.
You've got it. Well, I mean, the Constitution, U.S. Constitution gives us, right, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. We have similar amendments in our Constitution in Colorado, which is a little bit bigger than that. But it's harder to get things into the Constitution. It takes a 55% vote to win, to get it into the Constitution. And these are things that the legislature, our lawmakers can't change. If it's in the Constitution, they can't change it. Only the people can change it. Now, a statutory amendment, which are all those propositions that you see, if it says proposition, those are statutory, which means it goes into our law books, just like if a lawmaker made a law. So that means the legislature could come and change it. And they have on many occasions. We pass things and they go ahead and change it. So this is unchangeable by the legislature. There's no redefining words. There's no tweaking it to make sure it's correct. No, the legislature then has to implement this. That is their duty, to implement the Constitution. But I will say this, they don't necessarily follow the Constitution up at the Capitol either. Just saying. But there will be people holding them to account on this,
Sure. Yeah.
So.
And it's important to, I think it's good to make that distinction. I think there are a few constitutional amendments on the ballot that do have some far reaching implications, this just being one of them. And so for those of you that are listening and wondering how do I know if it's constitutional or not? That just like what Carolyn just said, if it says it's a constitutional amendment, then that is going on the Constitution. So make sure you really consider that as you decide which way you're going to vote on any of those measures, really, as you should with all. But it's a higher level, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay. So as Colorado homeschoolers, what can we do? We can vote. How else can we get involved?
Yeah. I think we kind of need to step back a little bit and remember kind of where we came from. We were in the top 10 worst states to homeschool in Colorado. So we can't take these things lightly in what's happening. People were threatened with jail and all kinds of stuff. And I don't want to go back there. So we need to remember where we came from. We need to educate ourselves on these principles that I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about natural law, jurisdiction, this idea of what's really the role of government and what are they supposed to do and what are we supposed to do? So really educating ourselves and get a good grounding on that, because if we had that, we would be able to read this and go, oh, I know what they're saying here. So we need to be more educated ourselves on these principles and then get engaged on some civil government level. It doesn't have to be at the state level. It could be local level, because things are coming through on the local level as well. School districts are now starting to get in on the game. They want to pull the homeschoolers back in, so they're creating all kinds of programs to do that. They're starting to create positions to oversee the homeschoolers in their district. I mean, so things are starting to happen on that level as well. So local level is important too. And some of the legislators come through the local school boards and end up at the legislature. So it's educating even those local level, officials, elected officials, on what our perspective is on homeschooling and on first principles, like the principles of jurisdiction and stuff like that. Because when they get there's only a handful that really understand this idea of the role of government and what's the jurisdiction of the civil government. It's astounding because they've been taught in the public school system and don't know. So teach our kids civics, the proper civics, and that'll help too, because one year I had like 3 interns who were in college. They were homeschool students. And the only thing I concentrated on, what's the role of government? And if I could get that through their head, then I felt like I did something. At the end of the session, we would look at a bill. Okay, first question, is it the role of government? No. Okay, let's throw that one out. So out of the 700 bills that we saw, there was, I don't remember any that really were the role of government. So yeah, it's something we all need to learn and to teach others. So that would really help a lot. But stay engaged, stay up. Like you get the emails, so you know what's happening. That's important as well. Just keep an ear on where things are going. Listen to your friends too. I mean, the stories that I hear as I go talking around the state and what's really happening to homeschool families. Yeah, it's important to know. So stay connected and just help one another. That's what we got to do. Yeah.
Thank you. As a side note, any good resources for teaching civics?
That's a good question. I mean, Tech has a book for civics that's really good. You can teach all levels with it, really. But to really dig in, there's probably some good online courses out of Patrick Henry or some of these other places that could give you some real solid foundational stuff. The Institute for Principled Studies has some great stuff too that they put out. So definitely look at some of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn, for taking the time to be here with me today and helping explain what this is all about. Hopefully people will listen and get some clarity and be able to be a little bit more discerning when reading future bills as well, based on what we talked about here today. So I really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you again, Carolyn, for that very informative episode. And thank you, listener, for listening to the Super Simple Homeschool Podcast. Please share this episode with someone that you think would benefit from learning this information. And as always, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a future episode. This is the last episode of 2024. Join me again in 2025 for more great homeschooling content to help you find purpose in your homeschool while keeping things super simple. Have a great holiday season.